Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Have a great day.
My name is Kenny. I'm an alcoholic. And I'm incredibly grateful to be here tonight at the Sunday speaker meeting, 5th anniversary. I remember when this meeting started. I remember Teresa moving up here from California and talking about starting something like this. And I've been to the meeting pretty irregularly, admittedly, but through all 5 years, I've seen this meeting change homes and do some different things. But the format is just one that I love. There always seems to be a desire here to have a message that has depth and weight. And so hopefully we'll have an AA meeting here tonight, and we'll get some of that depth and weight in. But I just wanted to say to Teresa and to Todd and all of the home group members, everybody that raised their hand, thank you so much. It's such a service to the AA community here in this area that this particular meeting has been going for 5 years, and I think a lot of people have been attracted to it. So thanks for that. I bring my big book up with me when I'm going to speak, and I've got the reason I do that, I'm not going to open the book and start reading to you, I promise. I'll stop short of that. But I bring it up because of the thing that I just talked about, which is the depth and weight that this reminds me about what it is that I'm supposed to talk about when I'm asked to share in an AA meeting. And it's a great reminder for me that, thank God, when I got sober, there were people that were clear on what the message is in the book Alcoholics Anonymous and our other text that describes the 12-step process and the spiritual awakening. And I've been guilty of not adhering to that myself. You know, there was a time in AA when I was what it was like and what it was like guy. And what that... You know, people, I'd be telling my story, and then I'd say, okay, and then I went to treatment for the third time. They'd think, oh, my God, thank God this guy's going to get sober. And then I'd say, and then I got drunk the day I got out, and oh, no, here we go again. And it's nice to have that part of the story. It's nice to have what happened part, what it was like, what happened part, that I've had a spiritual awakening as a result of the 12 steps, which is entirely changed my outlook and attitude on life, that it's revolutionized my thinking, that I've had the psychic change that the book talks about, and everything in my life today is different. I've been sober since June the 8th of 1989, continuously sober since that date, and that's a real miracle. You know, one of the great speakers and a guy that became a close friend of mine from down in Teresa's neck of the woods was a guy named Clint H. And Clint used to talk about, it was one of my favorite things because he was such a gentle man. And that always attracted me. It always attracted me, the message it had humility. I never was too much for a guy that was pounding too much. But Clint just had this real loving way about him. He was a real humble human being. And he used to talk about this part in Bill's story where, you know, he talks about that, the spiritual experience comes slowly for some people, but for me, its impact was sudden and profound. And Clint used to say, well, how nice for you, Bill, in his story. But then later, as Clint got sober longer and longer, and such it is for me, that I look back on that now, and I was a guy that drank for years, and on June the 8th of 1989, I was parked behind a McDonald's restaurant not too far from here where I was camped out, and I'd been there for a long time, and I was as totally hopeless as they can be, and on June 9th of 1989, I was sober, and I've been sober ever since. So the spiritual awakening took a while, I think, but when I look back on it, just like Clint would look back on it, I realized, that was moving right along. From that day, and, something happened on June 8th of 1989, the day that I got sober. So, I came from a family that had alcoholism was in the family. My mother has been sober 35 years, something like that now. My stepdad that I grew up with died homeless on the streets of Seattle. He was one of the, I won't go into details, but he was, and I've worked with a lot of alcoholics since. And my stepfather, Denny, was perhaps the worst alcoholic I ever saw. I saw him as a young kid in delirium tremens. I saw him screaming in terror. I saw him with sick. I saw him, in having hallucinations from trying to stop drinking, and I saw especially the despair on his face when I would catch him drinking when I knew he wasn't supposed to be drinking. He'd have a bottle downstairs or something. So I grew up around that, and there's a lot of things that happen. But when I was about 13 years old, 12 or 13. I think my older brother actually was 12, and we got a neighbor to buy us some wine for some work that we'd done. And he was a nice hippie guy, and this was the early 1970s, and so we asked him when we were done, hey, would you be willing to buy us some wine or some alcohol with the money that you owe us? And, being a good hippie in the 1970s, he had no problem at all buying alcohol for 12-year-olds. So he was just like, hey, no problem. I'll be glad to help you kids out. What do you want? And I just knew that at my house there was a gallon of Gallo wine on the table, and it was just a staple. Everybody would drink off that. When it was gone, there was another one, and when that ran out, they'd go to the store and get more. So I said, wine. We'd like to have some wine. And so he said, okay, and what kind of wine do you want? And I think already this strange mental twist had happened where I said, well, I'm not really so concerned about the type of wine. I'm really looking for the amount here, just get us the most wine you possibly can for the amount of money that you owe us. So he said, okay, I know what you kids want. And he left, and he came back, and he had, in a grocery bag, he had 5/5, the tall ones, of MD 2020. So, yeah. And so I think, it's been that way I've been that way for a long time. I tell that story just for that reaction right there, because I don't even need to tell you the rest of the story, but I can tell you that I was off to the races from that first time, and I'm an alcoholic member of Alcoholics Anonymous. It means if you took all of the drugs and everything out of my story, I drank alcoholically, and for me, alcohol was one of the more severe things that I did it was the hardest impact on me. But I just will say this, because I feel incomplete without saying it, that it was a short trip for me from that first drink to smoking pot, to doing hard drugs, to doing real hard drugs, to selling drugs in junior high, to starting in with IV drugs as a fairly young teenager. And so I was off to the races, and I was in a lot of foster homes and group homes. I was institutionalized during my high school years. And, I came out of that experience. My grandfather worked on fishing vessels. I grew up not too far from here, by the way. I would have went to Ballard High School, but the law had other ideas. The thing that I guess it's important for me to say is that, that's just the way it was for me. I just was completely off the hook from the very beginning, and you can kind of imagine the rest where that led to. I was a criminal. I stole. I did anything I had to. And at a real early age, there's a part in the book that I really like where it says that these people aren't drinking for the relief, they're drinking to overcome a mental obsession beyond their control. And that's the way it was for me, especially when I got into my 20s. I got sober when I was 28 years old. When I got older, those last 3 years of my drinking, there was no going to shows left. There was no camaraderie with friends. There was no feeling that life was good. There was no, there was a time when I had that. My friends, we'd have this melancholy moments where I would just grab my friends and just say, God, I love you, man. And I'd hug them, and they'd hug me, and we'd be drunk out of our minds. But I knew they had my back. I knew they were there for me if I needed them. And, that's when the booze was really working. But those last 3 years, the only thing I was left with was this obsession for more. That was it. There was nothing left. I was just this constant compulsion. The book, describes that, as this phenomenon of craving or this obsession of the mind that the book describes. And the word I was looking for actually was the merciless obsession. That's the word that Bill Wilson uses to describe that. Merciless obsession, because I would be just praying, literally praying. I'd been through treatment many times before I got sober, and I went sincerely to those treatments. It wasn't a joke. It was terrible for me to have to go to treatment because of what would happen to me when I stopped. I was at a point where I got really, really sick when I stopped, but I would go. And I would get out of treatment, and the restless, irritable discontent would start sober, and I just couldn't hang on. This obsession would be there, and then once I started, that obsession for more would drive me right back into another spree, and that's the way it was for me. And I found some relief when I got out of the institutions. And I was just getting ready to turn 18. My grandfather worked on fishing boats and boats going up to Alaska. He worked for a family, and so he said, hey, why don't you come down? And the whole idea of my family was, we'll put this kid on a boat and get him up to Alaska to straighten him out, because everybody knew I was off the hook. So, but you laugh, but the truth is, honestly, I was 18 and I was about 26 when that ended, and I loved it. I just loved it, I loved the whole thing. I loved the guys. It was the first men I'd ever been around that taught me how to work hard, and they were all work hard, play hard. They weren't work hard, play hard guys. They were actually play hard while you worked guys. So and there's people here that know, but this was. This was the like 1979, 1980, think there was the wild, wild west up there at that time, and everybody was just going completely crazy, and the guys that I was working with put me through treatment twice. These were guys that were using a lot of drugs and drinking around the clock, and they recognized there was something. There was an intensity to my drinking that scared anybody that was around me at that time. They just knew that, hey, this guy is going to die here on the boat, if we can't find him some help. It wasn't, and I know a lot of these guys today. I still am in that same business today. I've sober. Somehow I found that I was wired in a way to where I had a pretty good mind for business, so I've been somewhat successful in that business, but that one thing, this obsession. It's really remarkable how the transformation in Alcoholics Anonymous works the way that it does. That when you have somebody, and I promise you, there's somebody here tonight that's suffering from this condition I'm talking about, this merciless obsession. I've been there. Got up and walked right out of a meeting and went and got drunk. So, there is an answer here. These guys put me through treatment, and I loved my job. I really did. I loved working with the guys, and I loved being able to party while I was working, and I just loved everything about it. But when I got out of treatment the second time, I came back to work, and I asked these guys to loan me some money till I could get back on my feet, but I was totally loaded out of my mind when I was asking them for money, and they just paid to have me go through treatment, and they just said, Kenny, until you get your act together, don't come back. And I spent the next several years just kind of wandering around. I spent some time at my mom's house and in the back room at my mom's house, and I ended up on 85th and Aurora. There was a 85th and Greenwood. There was a McDonald's restaurant that was there, and they were between the McDonald's restaurant and the Hagar's Tavern. There's another building that has a tavern. If you walk by the front, it looks like that it's all one building in front. But around back, if you go around back, there's actually about a 6 or 8 foot spacer, and it's all torn down now. But that's where I would go. I would go back in there. I grabbed a big piece of cardboard. I put it up. And the home of the fellowship, the Fremont Fellowship at Greenwood, was at that location. I could go out the back parking lot of that McDonald's, and there was a little horseshoe-shaped parking lot, and in one of the other buildings was the backside of this AA hall. And I knew a guy that was going there at that AA hall. I was completely out of my mind. It was just an uncomfortable way to live in a way that I would sit there and I could hear people driving through the drive-through, and I would hear them say, "Yeah, I'll have a number 3 supersize with a Diet Coke." And I thought they were saying, "Hey, there's a freak out here shooting Coke. Somebody call the FBI." And so it was kind of like a little tense kind of a way to live, just constant kind of, God dang it, And I was sober a long time. I swear to you, I was sober a long time before I finally occurred to me that the FBI doesn't spend a lot of time trying to flush drug addicts out from behind McDonald's. They leave that to... But I was convinced. But I knew a guy that was going to a meeting at Fremont Hall, and he and his girlfriend had taken me in several times, nursed me back to health. And so somehow I walked into that meeting on June 8th and sat down. It was a B1 meeting. I think it was a Thursday night, 8 o'clock meeting. I walked in, I sat down, I sat through the meeting, and my friend never showed up, so I had no idea what I was going to do. I was totally out of money. I was getting really sick. I didn't know what I was going to do, and something happened to me that I didn't expect. I just started crying in front of everybody in this AA meeting, and like big tears. But the thing that I think about now when I look back on it is that I was so disconnected from that. It didn't feel any different to me than it would have felt if I was laughing out loud or if I would have just had serious depression. Just these tears were flowing, and I was just in this hopeless situation. And a guy came up to me when the meeting ended. And I like to say this too. I like to say that I learned about giving in Alcoholics Anonymous from experts. So, after the meeting, a guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, my friends and I have been talking, and if you're willing to go out and get in the car, we'll take you to detox." And they said, "As a matter of fact, we've already made a few phone calls, and they got a bed waiting for you." And I'm thinking in my mind, well, I'm kind of a busy guy, and I hadn't done a lot in the meeting, so I'm thinking, how in the hell does this guy know I need to go to detox? And I was filthy dirty. My clothes were filthy dirty. I hadn't showered in I don't know how long. I had long hair. I had a jean jacket vest with leopard skin lapels and leopard skin belt and, big silver rings. And I was emaciated. And I had a bag that had my tennis shoes in it. I had no shoes on my feet. And the reason was that my feet had got abscessed and they were too sore to put my shoes on anymore. So I guess I don't have much better to do, so I got in the car with these guys. They took me to detox, and my trip in AA, my journey in AA started. Al B was the guy that took me to Detox. He was my first sponsor. He's still a sponsor that I keep in contact with all the time. He lives over in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho right now. And it's been such a great relationship because he was 13 years sober. I got to try to do the math here real quick, but he was 13 years sober, and I'm 25 years sober. So now he's 38 years sober, and I'm 25 years sober. So we've both been able to watch each other's growth and progression, and it's fantastic. Every time we talk, it's just there's nothing like it in AA. The love of one alcoholic for another, and especially when you get involved with somebody at that kind of a level and you help them and you see them get better. And my wife Shannon and I, we have a pretty wide open AA house, and we've seen a lot of people make their beds and walk again through the years. A lot of them guys are in this room tonight, guys that I sponsored and that are here sober tonight. I got into a workshop in early sobriety, and one of the things I wanted to, I read a book not too long ago, and I'll get into history real quick, but I'll just kind of brush over that prior to AA, Bill Wilson and his friend Ebby were going to these Oxford group meetings. There was no AA meetings. They were going to Oxford group meetings, which was kind of a churchy, first century Christianity organization that would do a lot of things, but among other things, they tried to help anybody that needed help, including alcoholics. But one of the writers that they had was a real prolific writer, wrote a lot of books about the Oxford group during the time that they were really prominent. And I found one of his books. I always look for these because I just like them because of the history part, but I found one of his books, and it was called One Sermon to Preach was the name of the book. And so I read it, and it was this Peter Howard, this guy, and Peter would thought about, he's going to go, he went to all of the great preachers of his time and asked them if they would contribute to a book that he was going to write, not write, but that he was going to edit and publish, and if they would give him the idea of, if you only had one sermon to preach, what would you talk about? And I think it's important when new people come into Alcoholics Anonymous that they hear that message when they come to AA. We owe it to them to hear a message that has depth and weight, to be thoughtful. Once we're around here for a while and we've worked the steps and we're sponsoring people, to be thoughtful about the kind of message that we're carrying, that it does have depth and weight. And so I think about that now when I was talking. So I was thinking about that tonight, and I thought, well, what is it that I would really want to talk about? And really, the thing I'd like to talk about, I hope I don't bore people too much, but I'd like to talk about the spiritual awakening that I don't know how many meetings there is in the Seattle area now. Is there, I don't know, I hear all kinds of numbers, 500 or 800 or whatever it is. There's a lot of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and then you got the dances and the potlucks and all that, which, don't get me wrong here, the steps were not my strong suit in early sobriety. That was the picnic and the potluck and the camp out, and that was where that's where I really found a firm hold. But this, when I went to this workshop that was down at Fremont Baptist Church, and I met these guys that were hand carrying people through the steps, and they would do what they called trolling the bottom. They'd come down through Fremont Hall and places, and they'd come at the midnight meeting or the candlelight, and they would find people, and they would look for the face of hopelessness in the crowd. And that's their words. They would look for the face of hopelessness, and they found me there. And they started showing up regularly and sitting down and talking to me and telling me things like, you can die of untreated alcoholism living in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're doing a little workshop where we're going to go through the steps, and we'd like you to join us. So I started going to this little workshop, and these guys hand carried me through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, just page by page, paragraph by paragraph. We used a dictionary. It was, instead of a big book study, it was a big book do. When it said to do something, we did it. So when it said that we would do our third step, we did our third step and inventory. And it said that if we would do the same things, the basic text, the main purpose of this book is to show you precisely how we have recovered, that if I would precisely do what these early people in AA would do, I would have precisely the same results. And, we're so lucky that we had somebody like Bill Wilson, I think. Bill was one of the major contributors to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, major contributor to the 12 and 12 and a lot of Grapevine stuff. He was the first person ever to pen our 12 steps, the first one to pen our 12 traditions and our 12 concepts for world service. And he did that because he had the support of other people in the fellowship that recognized this guy was a very eloquent writer. And he had just these beautiful ways of putting things. And in his sobriety, he would, he had a lot of time where he would go out and try to help other alcoholics. He wasn't keeping anybody sober but himself. And then it was, he was 6 months into it when he really found some traction and met Dr. Bob and got AA number 3. And the thing that he writes about this will be rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we'd not even dreamed. And we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences that have revolutionized our whole attitude and outlook on life. And he writes about drinking, about the hideous 4 horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, despair. And one of the lines I love the most in the Big Book, it says, "Unhappy drinkers who read this page will understand." He wrote in his own story, about being 18 months sober, and he writes this really profound piece in there that I just love because he's 18 months sober, and he writes in there, "I was not too well at the time. I was plagued by waves of misery and depression." But he found that as soon as he would go to the hospital, and upon visiting a man there, when he left, he said when he left the door, he would feel amazingly uplifted and set on his feet. The guy just was it's amazing. And one of the things a guy told me in early sobriety, I was getting to know the Big Book pretty well, and he said, "Kenny, I want you to read the Big Book again, but this time I want you to read it as poetry." And that's where I found a lot of the stuff that I've been the most attracted to in the Big Book. It's that. But at the end of his drinking, he writes these simple words: "No words can tell." Even a guy like that can't put it into words, the depth of the morass and self-pity that he'd fallen into. So I started going to this workshop, and the workshop, I would say, is what's called a loud wake-up call. So if I came to AA and I needed a spiritual awakening, that would tell me that I was spiritually asleep when I came to AA, or I wouldn't need an awakening. So I was somebody that was walking around asleep in my life, dreaming that I was awake. If someone would have told me I was asleep, I didn't believe him, because, it was like I was dreaming that I was awake. And the further asleep you are, and I'm so grateful that I got sober with people that understood this, the further asleep you are, the deeper the slumber, the louder the wake-up call. So I'm a guy that tends to carry a bit of a louder wake-up call, trying to reach guys that were like me. And I'm grateful. There's another fellow I really love to read is Anthony DeMello, and he's a mystic that writes. He was a Jesuit priest, and he's been dead now a number of years. But I love the way he starts that one book, Awakening. He just starts this book, and it just says, "Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up." That's his message. And I really think that's the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, too, that as long as I stay in that slumber and that sleeping and I'm not aware of what's going on in my life, it's only a matter of time. The booze and the drugs will take me out at will. I've got no choice when it comes to alcohol. It will take me out at will. I'll be restless, irritable, and discontent. And at some point, I'm going to succumb to the desire for a drink. So, I think that's the... and I can say today that I have had a spiritual awakening, and it's a lot different to having had a spiritual awakening than saying my life is perfect and without problems, because they're two totally separate things. But and I can say that I'm not cured of alcoholism. What I really have is just this daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual experience. And the book even goes further than that. Bill writes in the book, he says whether... And this goes into a thing that I think there's a lot of ideas around Alcoholics Anonymous that before AA, the alcoholic was just left to suffer and there was no treatment, there was none of that. But Bill went to Towns Hospital. And according to the history that I've read, Dr. Soper treated 50,000 alcoholics in his lifetime. Many of them before AA ever was existed. The Oxford group did okay. The Salvation Army's been around for an awful long time, and I still don't know whether AA or the Salvation Army's got more people sober, but there has been an answer. But what AA brought us was a program just for ourselves that knew what the problem was, the first step, and understood that the solution to that problem was to get to having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. The purpose of all of this is that I was left in a place where I knew I couldn't do it on my own. I knew that I had to have some kind of a psychic change, or the book calls it a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism, or a spiritual experience. I knew I had to have one of these in order to recover. I knew it was. I'd been through it too many times. I knew that the time and day would come, and so for me, these steps. Once I understood the problem, I'm powerless over alcohol, and my life is unmanageable. If you stay in that problem for very long, you will get drunk. It's clear. If you're powerless over alcohol and you have an unmanageable life, you can't stay sober. The rest of the steps are to remove. If we weren't blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit when we got here like I was, we'd have a 3-step program. We'd just come to believe, and we'd turn our will and our life over to the care of God in step 3, and we'd be fine. But Bill and others recognize that I'm blocked from the very thing that will save my life through resentment, through fears, through inappropriate behaviors, through this deep selfishness and self-centeredness. They said, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think of is the root of our problems. The alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. That means that if we have a graph, if somebody was to make a graph about self-will, you'd have on one end, maybe you'd have somebody like Mother Teresa or somebody like that on one end of the graph. Very little self-will there. She was one who really was able to constantly think about others and how she could help to meet their needs. But on the other end of the graph, what they're saying here, on the other end of the graph, all the way as far as you can get, the extreme example, there's all kinds of other people, but the extreme example is the alcoholic. If you come in, and we don't believe it sometimes, I didn't, because, self-pity and depression can be just another form of, and blaming everybody else for everything can be just another form of self-delusion. It's just another form of selfishness. It's still I can't break out of this 360-degree mirror that no matter which direction I look, and no matter how I look at a problem, the only thing I can see is how it reflects on me. That's it. And the steps are designed to break that. The steps are designed to shatter the 360-degree mirror so that we can see the truth about ourselves. One of my other favorite speakers was a guy named Don Pritz from Colorado, who's been gone 10 or 12 years now. And he used to say, any time an alcoholic discovers the truth about themselves, that is a spiritual experience. That means we're not blocked any longer about some truth in our life. We can see the truth about ourselves. So I'll tell just a couple. I got about 15 minutes left, and I promise you I'm going to wrap up right on time here. And there's a couple of things. So I just want to tell you, my spiritual awakening was it started in a very humble way. I was at the workshop, and these guys said they're bringing these big heavy hitters up from California. They're going to do a workshop, a weekend retreat up in the mountains up past Snoqualmie Pass. And so I hooked up with my buddy Patrick, who had the same sponsor, Al, that I did. And he was one day sober, less than I was. So I had 1 day more sobriety than Patrick. So I was kind of showing him the ropes and using that extra day of sobriety anytime I could. But we had to get up to this. This retreat. But everybody was saying, "Oh, don't worry, we'll give you guys a ride." And there was no way we were going up there without a getaway vehicle. But my car was the first sober car I ever had. I got it for $100 from my sponsor. He owned a car lot. It was $100 if you can get it running. $100, tax, license included, everything down the road. But that car was no way going to make it up Snoqualmie Pass because it had a massive transmission fluid leak. And if you parked it on a hill just wrong, it'd be like a gallon of transmission fluid, just red transmission fluid running out, bald tires. So we went and rescued this car that Patrick had been living in, that his sister had rescued. And it was up on blocks, had no tires, no wheels. But he said, I think the only thing really wrong with this, we could put a little money into it. We can get some cheap used tires and wheels, and I think the only thing wrong with it is it needs a new water pump, I think, because it was overheating last time it ran. So we got the thing going, and we headed up Snoqualmie Pass, and we're headed up the mountain there, and the car starts overheating. It wasn't the water pump. So we're filling these big jugs full of water. We'd go a mile or two, and then we'd pull over. We'd let the thing cool down. We'd put some water in it, and then we'd go a couple more miles. And people from Seattle, there was like 120 people at this retreat, and they were all people that knew us were pulling over and saying, "Hey, you guys all right?" "Oh, yeah, no, we're just fine. We're fine. Don't worry about us." They were like, "God, what's with all this water in the back seat here?" And, "Well, I got a little overheating issue, but we're letting her cool down. We'll see you guys up there." And because we were both like, "Hey, if this turns into some kind of deal where they're going to ask us for all our worldly belongings or something." I was living on my sponsor's car lot. And Patrick was living in a basement rooming house up on Highway 99. But we were not going to be separated from our worldly possessions. But so, anyways, we as we're going, we see this bus broke down on the side of the road, and the bus has the hood up. And there's a bunch of people outside this big yellow bus all kind of milling about. The hood is up. People are looking at the engine. And just before that, Pat and I had said, geez, they've been talking a lot about prayer at this deal. We were supposed to do our first third step ever, which I did up at that retreat. And we're supposed to do our first third step. Well, maybe all this God talk, and maybe we ought to try a prayer. So we just said, God, please help us get up the mountain. We're just a couple of alcoholics trying to, find a solution here. And if you could just help us out. And then we left, and we saw this bus broke down on the side of the road, and all these people milling about. And I looked on the side of the bus, and it said, "The Church of God," on the side of this bus. And I just thought, I told Patrick, if he ain't getting them up the hill, I don't know. I don't know where that falls in the category of the level of churches. But, I know like Protestant, Baptist, I said the Church of God, that's got to be way up there, That's got to, those people, and if their bus broke down, but we made it to that retreat. And that was really my journey through the steps. And I did a 4-step and a 5th step and came out, and I was really humbled in 6 and 7. I knew I couldn't treat women the way that I had been. I knew I couldn't keep blaming everything on everybody else. I knew I couldn't still blame all the problems on my mom and my grandfather and my brother and my sister, who all, by the way, were people who never did anything but try to help. And I blamed them for all my problems. And I couldn't, I had started having that awakening. And for me, the 3rd step was a pretty big deal. And doing the 5th step, I totally felt like a new man after I did my first 5th step. But really, the deal for me was making the amends. I went to a lot of stuff around here. I used to sober. I used to boost cigarettes for the first couple months of my sobriety at Bartell Drug Store or this place called Hoagie's Corner, which were up on 85th at that time. And I would walk in and just talk and buy a couple little packs of gum or something. And then there was these cheap cigarettes on the counter, and I'd snag a pack. And if I couldn't do it there, I'd go to Bartell's. If I couldn't do it at Bartell's once or twice a week, I'd actually buy a pack of cigarettes. But I went to the stores I'd shoplifted from. I went to my mom and made amends, and my mom was 19 when I was born, and I just let her, and she had a tough life, and I was able to tell her, Mom, I remember it wasn't all bad. I remember all the good times. My mom was a folk singer. She used to play at coffee shops up in the U District, and I would tell her, I used to love that when you would sit down, and because she would sit down and play her guitar and sing till my brother and I fell asleep every night. And I just, I would have told you going into that inventory that my mom I resented. Why did I resent her? Well, because she ruined my life. And the truth was, when I looked at it, and the late, great Sandy Beach, used to say something really profound that's been so true for me. And he says this past is really just a story that we tell ourselves. Because most of what I would have told you was my past when I got sober wasn't true. It was just a story that I'd made up. I would have told you that my mother ruined my life, that my grandfather liked my brother better than he liked me because he sent my brother to college, and I left out the part that I never wanted to go to college. And my grandfather got me that job working with those guys in those boats in Alaska. And it just went over and over and over like that. And I'm a guy that for the last 3 years of my drinking, I did something I probably owe an amends for. So amends has really become a way of life for me. I don't have any 8-step list amends currently. And I haven't had. I take care of them when they come up now. I take care of them. But there was a time when I had a very, very big list, and I just lived in amends for several years. And I had some great examples. I had a guy that used to come into the hall, and he would say, I made another amends today, and I went to 4 stores that I shoplifted from and paid it back, and his life was getting better, and all kinds of things were happening in his life. So I had these great people sharing their amends stories with me, and it encouraged me that if I would make some of these amends myself, maybe I'd have some of these experiences. And then I had, like I told you, I was helped by, I got help from AA by experts. And, I was told 2 things. One, I was to say a prayer, God, take me to my next amends, every moment of every day until I had those done. And all kinds of remarkable things happened. People would pop up in meetings, or people would call, or I'd run into somebody that said, hey, you know who I saw yesterday? And then the other one was to ask yourself about each amends, especially the ones you don't want to do. Does me making this amends have anything to do with whether I will drink again or not? And he told me, if it doesn't have anything to do, Kenny, with whether you'll drink again or not, then you might not have to make that amends. But you better know the truth about yourself before you decide not to make an amends. And I knew in each case it would eventually come to me that this is about my drinking. And although I still had the Bill Wilson, I was not too well at this time stuff going on, I also had these great moments, I think, that most newcomers, can relate to. And I'm 25 years sober now, and what I find more and more is that people that are 2 or 3 or 4 years sobriety, that they got what I want. Because they're fired up about the program, and they're in service, and they're doing things, and they're out there making their amends, and they're excited about sponsoring somebody for the first time, and they're hearing a fifth step for the first time, and just that excitement about being in AA and going through this stuff for the first time, and I miss that sometimes because it's so easy to get busy with your life and forget how amazing that stuff was when I would. In early sobriety, I swear, when in early sobriety, you get a 12-step call and you step on the gas, headed down 15th down here towards downtown, and every light just turns green, green, green. It's just, it's amazing. And I had a few of those experiences where I just was able to say, I just get these chills up my spine, and I would just be like, God, it's good to be alive. So with the few minutes I got left, I thought I'd tell you a couple of quick analogies, and one of them is this. When I was homeless, I was homeless as a child a lot, just because for me as a child, there were times in my home when walking around on the streets was a better option than going home, so I was homeless a lot as a teenager. And during that time, I had this friend, Steve, and he had this garage, and it was fixed up, and it was so cool. He had loudspeakers. He had a German Shepherd dog, Rick, that was just meaner. I mean, it was the meanest dog I think I've still ever met. It was just a cool place, just unbelievable. And he had a bong, I'd have to tell you to light it from down there. He had this big bong, and Inagata DeVito was playing, and his parents were in the house next door, and he was living in the garage, but it was so cool. And for so many years, I'd think, God, if I could just have a garage like that, life would be wonderful. I think we come into AA like that. We come in with this limited perception, that if I could just get a garage, I'd hang up some blankets, and I'd have a little bed space, I'd put in a little hot plate and a refrigerator, and man, life would be so wonderful if I could. And it was never going to be my garage. It was always going to be if somebody else would let me live in their garage. Life would be wonderful. That's what I came into. That's the mindset I came into AA with. And my wife Shannon, the beautiful and wonderful Shannon, she had a story not terribly unlike the one I just told, and as far as our childs that are concerned, and after we got married, we bought our first house together, and it was the nicest house either one of us had ever lived in our whole lives. And we sold that house quite a few years ago and bought another place that's over the top, nicer than. And I sponsored a guy that lived down the street, and he came over to the new place, and we got a view of the locks, and we could see the water, we could see the mountains. I mean, it's really a great place. And but my friend Jim came over, and he came walking in. And he said, walked around, he took a look, and he'd heard this story I just told, and he looked around, he's looking at this big view and everything, and he points to me, says, "Nice garage." So one of the things I like, it's like when we're taking people through the steps, nobody can say, I'm the only one that can say my name is Kenny and I am an alcoholic. And when I say that, what that means is that aside from a spiritual awakening, the time and day will come when I will drink again. I've got no defense against the first drink. My name is Kenny. I'm an alcoholic. And it's that way with so many things in life. I found that as much as I would like to grab my new guy and say that I am for them, it doesn't mean anything. What I believe, my experience, it doesn't get anybody else sober. You got to have your own experience. And I discovered that the solution couldn't be in the book. The solution couldn't be in the meeting. The solution had to be in Kenny. It's the only place where it counts. Other than that, it's just intellectual knowledge and information and somebody else's experience. And so I've become, a fan of that. Nobody can say that I am for you. I can tell my friend Bob, you're a beautiful, wonderful, loving child of God who means well and does well and is an amazing person. I told him that this morning when we had breakfast at my kitchen table this morning. But only Bob can say that for himself. Only I can say I am Kenny and I am a loving child of God, and it means anything at all. And that's something I've discovered in AA, that I could think about, well, maybe God would have me live in a house with a family and a couple of dogs. So I said that for my wife. Yeah, she's. So really, that's it. I said I'd end on time, and I'm going to do just that. So thank you so very much for letting me come and share this anniversary with you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.